Right. So, hello everyone. We are recording the session. So if anybody wants to sort of like stay out of it as picture, or then just don't switch your camera on. If you want to ask a question anonymously, you can also just either send it to me privately or ask in a chat, because the chat will not be recorded and we will just read it out. But otherwise, in the question sessions, you are free to also just speak up and give your opinion and so on. I don't think it.
Ask people if they can, ask Tyler if he can hear you. Okay.
Can anybody just confirm that you can hear us well?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we are like three of us here are the main interlocutors today, and we basically just intended this as like an intro session where we sort of map out our understandings and our
I wanted you to switch.
Right. No, it's fine because you will be talking first, I think. So anyway, basically, we just thought we would just sort of brainstorm on the topics of semiotics and AI and technology and see what kind of concepts and ideas and questions we have. So we will start, the three of us, Alec, Josh, and I, and then we will open up like the floor to anybody to give your additional opinions or questions or whatever thoughts you have on the topic. And yeah, this session will be recorded, will be published on YouTube later, and I will try to also convert it into like a text and a podcast format, so it can be followed later on. And thank you everyone for being here, both online and in classroom also. Very nice to see you all here.
I think Alex.
Yeah, so yeah, I'll just give the floor to Alec. And
hello. It's nice seeing some familiar names online. To begin, I'll talk more about like what I focus on in my PhD research. So I look at techno living spaces. So I'm curious what it means to live within technology. I love talking about affordances. This is something that, you know, with semiotic modeling, it helps us understand how we interact with objects. So I think affordances is a great way to look at how the design process and the way users perceive an artifact. But recently I have a upcoming article about the Umwelt in an Umwelt. This deals more so with like immersive reality and virtual reality, but more so I'm looking at what it means to be in two places at the same time. But I've always been interested in AI. So it's great that Auli has research specifically focused to the narratives around it. So hopefully with this seminar series, we can unfold different topics that really haven't been covered in academia yet. So with that in mind, anyone who is a participant, if you have any sort of questions that you want us to like look into, you can talk about it later today, and we can either, if it's a simple question, we can easily talk about it today. But if it's something that is, you know, worthwhile exploring, we can definitely integrate it into, you know, a further seminar. But for me, one of the interesting things I plan on researching more about within the seminar series is what's happening to the semiosphere when we incorporate AI within this cultural system. So specifically what I'm curious about is, how is AI affecting the core? How is it affecting the periphery and the border as well? So what I'll look at is specific cases of different cultures that utilize AI, such as using it to screen potential job applicants. Because it's one of these things that if you are a semiotician and you put this on your CV, you don't really know if whoever reads the CV will understand what semiotics is. So even then, when you have to create a CV and represent yourself through the lens of a technology, we have to understand how this affects the, the outside and the inside, and where this translatability comes into play. So the semiosphere is something that I find very important when it comes to the way the knowledge of AI is disseminated, like globally. So we do see a lot of information being shared on like a very much a pop culture basis, making it kind of seem like AI is greater than humans. It might be good at some things, but it's one of these things that with creativity and learning and imagination, these are aspects that are essential for the human consciousness. So it's more so understanding how we can keep that in the picture and not lose the human creativity or any other, intrinsic values that we possess. So looking at the semiosphere for the human culture aspect is one thing, but at the same time, I'm also curious to see how we can better understand like an AI semiosphere. And one thing that I am curious about is relating it to this notion of the umwelts, and how, we've, for the past 20 years or so, we've talked about how the AI does not have an umwelt. But Kozicki last week, he gave a speech about the umweb. So this umweb is the relations of the umwelts within the environment. So what I'm curious about is, how is AI creating this umweb that is creating these habits within an environment? So again, it's not so much emphasizing on the umwelts of AI, but it's showing, I want to dive deeper into the relations of these umwelts in the environment. So with this, maybe it will give us a better understanding of maybe not spending so much time looking into the umwelts in AI, but more so creating discourse about the umweb in AI and understanding how this is affected to the semiosphere itself. So those are the two main theoretical models me personally, I'll explore more about in this series, looking at it from semiosphere and looking at it from this umwelt aspect and this subjectiveness as well. So now I will pass it over to Josh.
Hi, everybody. So I'll be looking at a lot of our discussions and our guests. So our guests will come and talk. And one of my responses, if you will, I'll frame a number of my responses to their presentations from what I'd like to call the cybernetic mode. So the idea that society has, well, for some time, but certainly in this day and age, is operated with forms of cultural control so for example, the idea of technics that developed by, not the least of which would be Guibert Simondon, but also maybe more generally known would be the myth of the machine by Lewis Mumford, and different thinkers that understand that we don't really have necessarily a problem of scarcity, but one of exuberance as certainly as humans, and that one of the ways that culture manages that exuberance is through our machines. That throughout history, even the printing press, for example, was an example of a machine that was developed. Like the idea of copying already existed long before the printing press, but once the printing press automated copying, it created a great deal of tension in the system because it amplified and exposed a lot of contradictions in culture, namely, the church's practices, hypocrisy, if you will, between, indulgence, how they acted and what they said they were doing. So what's interesting is how technology played a role in the Protestant Reformation, for example. And so similarly, there's modes of ways that machines alienate us from ourselves that I'd like to explore, while simultaneously liberating us, and not always necessarily in a peaceful way, as the example of the printing press. So, for example, AI is another way that we simultaneously sort of have this contradictory notion of feeling like we are generating a lot of content, but it is actually controlled. It is actually steered, kind of like a maybe Deleuzian snapping to the grid, if you will. This idea that that the machine, again, is, as a mode of control, is steering discourse towards a certain I won't say preferred, because that makes it seem like there's someone in the algorithms that knows exactly what they're doing. But for example, biases that algorithms find that highlight, structural biases in making decisions about who goes to jail or not when court systems use AIs to help them cut through their workload, that are intrinsic right now, that are becoming more prevalent and problematic. So to explore, again, through these different lenses, these different theoretical lenses, how we've been here before, and that we can maybe understand the tension between human exuberance, like creating a lot of content and symbols, but at the same time, it's turning around and really limiting our options at the same time. And one thing that I'll come back to quite a lot, actually, is just to remind all of us that machines are not sentient. We can get into this more, and some people might disagree. In the AI hype, it's tempting to think that oftentimes the AI hype builds off the suspicion that maybe ChatGPT is sentient, for example. But what we want to do is, what I'd like to do with this series is, in addition to investigating all this that we're interested in, but also dispel the notion that these machines are sentient, that in fact they're doing what it is I said before, these aspects of cultural automation and control. And then I might bring in some, Peirce's degenerate modes if the conversation goes that way. I know we have a mixed crowd of people coming from different disciplines and different theoretical backgrounds. But there's just a lot of people that came before that really can weigh in and help us navigate where we are today. Looking forward. And out.
Okay. Okay. You can share that video screen. Anyway, hi. For me, this series is a kind of a way to channel my PhD work. We have a friend here, Gecko. Anyway, we have a four-legged, semiotic creature. Hello. Anyway, Gecko is one of the reasons why I really strongly feel about every time when some researchers compare AI to animals, or say things like, oh, we should treat robots as animals, or we should take them as our pets somehow, and that this is somehow a better way to integrate robots or machines in culture than comparing them to humans. And I don't think it's that simple at all. And this kind of approach also has impacts on how we treat animals, actually, in a similar manner that, for example, even imagining animals in cartoons has impact on how we treat the real animals that the cartoon animals are modeled on. This is something one of our colleagues, Jason Dudinsky, has researched a lot. And then there are, my own journey into AI and semiotics started a lot, maybe from similar premises than what Josh just said, about being worried about how AI is treated like a person or something like that, and how it conceals how it conceals the actuality of how these technologies function in culture, how they become to be, how they are built, these kinds of anthropomorphic imaginings, they conceal how much human work actually still goes into all these technologies to build them, to, for example, to label the data that is used in training most of these models, and how much people have to keep on working to sort of keep the models functioning. And while in the public media discourse, they are often sort of treated like some kind of magic machines that just happened, and now we have to accept them in society. But I think there are lots of ways we can still have a say as cultures, as societies, in how we actually want these technologies to be used, how we want them to function, what kind of ethical limits or challenges we want to address. And I think semiotics helps give this perspective on these technologies as what I like to call them sociotechnical or technosocial assemblages, meaning that they do consist of networks of people and machines. In a way, it goes into what Bruno Latour talked about in his actor network theory. But as I was just reminded today, he sort of distanced himself from his own theory towards the end, and he admitted how this ant perspective sort of conceals the society, or like the social part and also the environmental part, and a lot of ethical parts or ethical perspectives that are necessary to pay attention to. And theories like ant or new materialism, if I follow Alf Hornborg's critique, they don't really allow for seeing all these aspects every time. So here is also something that semiotics can contribute in with its theories and perspectives, and exactly like previously said, machines are not sentient, but humans are sentient. And when we talk about meaning making that involves machines in some manner, then of course we have, since the 90s, we have this concept of machine semiosis, which basically means that there is a machine and there is a semiosis, and the semiosis part happens in a human being that is using the machine. And of course, AI systems, for example, large language models, they really displace the ways we are habituated in our communication cycle. They displace the ways we understand the author. They sort of erase the habitual author, and now we have to look for the authors of the texts, either in the source texts that we use to train the machine, or somehow give this author role to the person who writes the prompts to the linguistic models. Then there are also the problems with copyright. For example, when the generative AI model gives you a result that is actually quite verbatim from something that is the original source text or source image, and it doesn't give a proper reference. So there is, in some ways, there is no way of knowing actually whether, you know, the result you got from this generative model, whether it's actually a copyrighted content in a way or not. So you don't know whether you plagiarize something or not. But definitely this sort of plays with our habitual understanding of what an author is, and how we attribute author rights, for example. And I'm not even doubting that probably the way we use, the way some of these discourses are going right now. It's sort of like kind of pushing us towards rethinking. I heard a suggestion the other day that maybe we are going back to like what the antique concept of an author was, which meant that people were just using the previous texts and recycling them and putting their own names on it, and like that the concept of author as like a proprietor or the owner of some kind of creative content wasn't really what it is today. So yeah, like maybe we are sort of going back to that with using these AI models at least. So this is one of the issues. And then I've been also looking into treating AI as a discursive practice, what kind of impacts it has on society, on politics. What are the politics of using robotics or automated technologies throughout history, not just only in the past 100 years, but these also the politics of robotics, so to speak, also dates back to the ancient Greece times in a way. There is also the critique of structuralism, or like how structuralist models have been used to conceptualize language in a way that would enable studying language as separate from its users. So yeah, this is also something I would like to revisit. And yeah, back to Alec and Josh, then also looking at the biosemiotic concepts of Umwelt and Umweb and the biosemiosis, and how, so yeah, like in every with every semiotic concept, basically there is definitely like 2 or 3 different levels at which we can look at AI. So there is a way to use semiotics to build better AI, or look for ways to build better cultural models that we could sort of apply in computers. There is the metalinguistic critique, which means that a lot of so biosemiotics has like a lot of cybernetic metalinguistic roots or histories, and so these concepts that are essentially quite cybernetic, so they have been borrowed back to describe processes in machines, leading to articles titled like such as can a robot have an Umwelt, or how we can use the Umwelt concept to sort of apply to robotic sensorial happenings. And so yeah, we want to question whether this is like a good way to use these heuristics concepts, or whether there are maybe better ways, or what does it actually say about the discourse, about AI, about semiotics, about us when we use the concepts in such manners. And yeah, so we're just, I suppose we're just taking it like the seminar for the following sessions to happen online mostly, just to have like an invited guest into all of each session and focus more deeply on some of the topics. And we have planned to do that like each 3 weeks and so on. So from the 8th of May, basically every third Monday should have a session, and we have a couple of them for May planned out already, and are looking to finalize the name list for the rest of the year. And yeah, thank you to everyone who has already agreed in some way or another to be part of that. and yeah, just follow the web information flows, and you will know when something is happening. But yeah, so now I would actually go back to like a repeat round, or like any
quick
Yeah.
round, and then we'll open it up. Yeah, that sounds good.
So-
if you have any thoughts on the thoughts.
I don't really have any specific thoughts in mind. I'm more so curious on what other people think about, especially from living in different places of the world, getting information from different sources. So if there's any sort of examples that you see that worthy of talking about and modeling, I would love to research it. Because me focusing on virtual reality, for instance, I'm very focused on like this specific type of environment that utilizes AI. But when it comes to actual, societal systems, using AI or facial recognition for catching criminals, or anything that relates to different institutionalized behaviors. This is something that I find very essential to understand how, okay, from the cultural perspective is one thing, but from the legal perspective, this is another issue, that the legality goes beyond just the actual border of the country. And this is something where I don't know, personally, we're not at the point to be able to synthesize them together when it comes to, global companies having these proprietary softwares, and like Tartu smart bikes, for instance. We have smart bikes in the city that we own, but we do not own the software for the smart bikes. So now what's happening is the company in Canada is asking for like over 300,000 euros for damage fees. So a yearly fee to fix the bikes. But yet the city government relies on the company because they are the ones in ownership of the actual software. So what happens is we create this relation to this external source. So it makes us not dependent on us. Again, even though it's just a software example, AI is going to make it much more concerning in various different levels, whether it comes down to not only knowing how to educate kids on not plagiarize using AI, but how can teachers actually teach the kids on how to use AI as a resource? How can we help them understand that, like, okay, this thing exists, but it should not be what you turn in. It should be something to help you flow your creativity. So it's one of these things. If we already know kids are going to use this as a way to cut corners, rather than creating more waterproofing, digital watermarks and everything, there's always going to be a way for kids to get around to doing their homework. So when it comes to the pragmatics, I think this is one issue that we can look more into the specific institutions, whether it is from like the educational or the entertainment and so on. So that's where, if there is any examples, please email it to Auli, and that will get to me. Or you can find me on Facebook or anywhere. That's very much acceptable too.
All right. What is, the prompting question for this meeting is, what is technosemiotics? So I just wanted, in listening to my colleagues, distill, not necessarily answer the question, but a couple of threads that I hope can help our discussion insofar as we're talking about it from a semiotic perspective, or otherwise. A couple of three threads in particular. Again, the control of culture that I was talking about earlier, but tying that back to Lotman, that Alec brought up. And I think Lotman can really help us understand that dynamic. Like Ali was talking about the cybernetic, but maybe at the social scale. and also extending von Uexküll perhaps, even though he was really in the realm of biology. I'm in the habit of extending some of his ideas more than he would to social phenomena. And again, Simondon is not a semiotician. No one ever accused him of that, but I do think that he can help us bear on some of the semiosis and the process of how signs are generated and maintained with his work, not only on individuation, but also his more well-known work on modes of technical objects, where he talks about how actually quite explicitly how technical objects like AI evolve. So there's lots of concepts in there that I'd love to bring to bear insofar as they help the conversation, which in turn speaks to machines not being sentient, as Auli echoed. And then finally, coming back again to where I kind of concluded my last thoughts is Peirce. Yeah, so Peirce was definitely grounds a lot of, well, to some degree, all of us here working on semiotics, and his approach to semiosis, and in particular, his degenerate modes of evolution as opposed to his non-degenerate modes of evolution. I won't get into that now, but for some of you who know that those works, those are definitely some of the theories that, yeah, I'd love to help to infuse into our conversation. Auli?
I don't know. I would actually just ask from everybody now your opinions, ideas, online, offline.
If I may, then I thought that as a legal issue, I will be not that much as a legal issue, because copyright and laws of authors will be different region to region. International law, yes, baseline can be like internationally, we set up some rules what we have to follow, but even then the different regions see this copyright and issue of authors differently. For example, in European countries, state basically that most of law, like copyright basically, is stating that authors are important. Like if you write something, it belongs to you, and nobody can take it from you. But for example, US perspective, then copyright basically saying that if you hold that copyright, then you don't have to like basically, as I understand, hold or like you don't have to make it, but you hold the copyright like a basic paper.
Okay, sorry.
You can like share it or sell it basically for everybody, because you have a contract which allow to sell it. But yeah, different fields. But for example, it's as I understand, it's for example literature, where you like if you have a copyright and versus Estonian law of authors, it's different because their underline or baseline is absolutely different, because European law states like author is the center of the piece, not who can share it. So I mean that
copyright law has like I've been doing some research on that. It has two roots. One is the romantic concept of author, and the other is printing as institution. Like printers versus like romantic authors. And the European model has tried to integrate these two, but focusing more on this romantic authors, this concept of creative individuality. While, as studied American system less, but I've understood that it is more on this printing press focused. And this copyright law is also, it's also in creative industry, it's different in different fields, because there are several clear fields of creative industry that are very collective, like films and theater production. And so the copyright functions there a bit differently than in literature, where you usually can find this one person that you can call author. Although we have there problems with editing, editors' right, editors' authorship, and with books that are like transmedia things, like with heavy illustration or film tie-ins, or this kind of borderline cases, or not so clear cases. But if we take a novel written by one person, it's usually a much easier case, one of the most easiest cases. While like films are usually much complicated from the authorship viewpoint also. So yes, and this IA in this field of authorship is yes, it brings out, but not unique. I think this kind of collective bodies, there are always been some kind of, like if we traditionally have been focusing especially in literature in written text. This is a romantic concept of author from Romanticism era. So it has marginalized these more collective types of literature, like many oral types of literature and this kind of things that always has existed, but have always been a bit more complicated in processing with this romanticism author model. And for example, Borges has done many things, like taking some text, translating it, and presenting it as his text, or putting some of his text in compilations under some other person's name, doing a lot of this playing around with not only making compilations, like collecting bits and pieces and putting them together and presenting himself as an author of this collection of things, which is also one complicated piece, which is pretty much what AI actually does, makes collections. And in science, we have had this concept that we have to attribute the authorship very well. When we quote somebody, we have to reference it. In literature, it's not important. You can quote somebody without giving this clear reference. So you can quote somebody so that only those who knows this author understand that you're quoting, playing like with your reader in this sense. So I don't know how much in this sense AI makes authorship more vague than it has already been.
Maybe we have to only state that we use something clarified, that if you use ChatGPT, then you have to like put it down that you use that on
but
your
it may be problematic with this commercial aspect, like this American aspect, because there is where the copyright has been very much editor companies and printing press focus, with the focus on commercial side. So with AI, yes, we can well, we want to get the editorial of this or the house that represents this kind of AI production then.
Because like about digital watermarks, right? The say this text was generated by ChatGPT. You could just write another text, you know, like it's not like you have to physically copy and paste it. That's not the only, you know, text you can generate. So I don't really see these digital watermarks being effective in like a massive sense. Sure, maybe it's for the people that just literally copy and paste, but for someone who actually like tweaks a couple words and actually writes it down, who's to say it's not the same text, you know? But even then, when it comes to like the ownerships, I think what happens with AI is it creates more layers. Like with recently, one of the big things is like AI music. So, you know, taking a song from one artist and making another artist sing the song. Like just recently, I think it was like yesterday or so, Drake and his record label had to ban a song from TikTok because, you know, Drake had no affiliation to the song, but this one AI generated song that was put out had like over 1 million views within a few days. So again, it's one of these things that like, you know, who's the owner of this art,
not
of this
the owner,
text?
it's well, it's like from certain aspect, this is knowing who is the author is interesting from our for our this romantic concept of author. But the real problem is whom should you pay?
Yeah.
TikTok pays for playing the music. The problem is whom should you pay? If you have used AI to create music that are as though performed by a famous musician. So should you pay this musician whose body you use for creating this image?
I think it's like a chain where you pay everybody some some count of what they own because you used like a software.
It may yeah, well, it may be complicated in some where the chain is too long. Like where you get the first authors whose work you have used.
You spend like 50 euros to make a song, you know, so you're making, or like you're the end user, but yet you're paying to create something that you don't even have like ownership of. And sure, it may sound like Kanye West, but in reality it is not Kanye West. Sure, it sounds iconically like them, but I don't know, even then there's like these memes of like the 3 US presidents that are just some of them are very fictionalized, some of them are kind of made to be realistic, but again, it's one of these things that like sure, freedom of speech is one thing, but yet when it comes to saying or making it seem like this one idol is saying something they're not, it's concerning to the extent of you don't know when someone will treat it as real, you know, and well, it's true for that matter. You know, monetizing is one aspect, but not being able to have this like artificial intelligence literacy, that's a whole nother topic, you know.
So is agency, is agency a problem then, or what?
It opens the gates for free market, but yet globally, free market isn't really structured that way. You know, it's these media corporations that are creating these cores. It's Google and these other AI companies that are creating non-transparency. You know, not showing what's in the box. It's, you know, what's the facial recognition company, Clearwater or something like that, but it's them not wanting to be in the courtroom so they don't have to disclose their algorithm. So it's one of those things, sure, from like the consumer perspective, it does have the potential to create more of a free market, but at the same time, this relies on like the relinquish power, which I don't really see that happening anytime soon.
So how do we get it back?
You have to become educated first. You have to first be literate on what is actually being provided to you, you know, such as understanding that this AI generated text is something that's real, but it may in fact not be true. So this is something where we can interpret it as something that is real, but yet it is up to the human to understand if it is true or false. Just like listening to an AI music song, like sure, we can experience it, oh, this is a great song, but when we see that it says Kanye West, Hey There Delilah cover, you have to kind of figure out how you can dive deep into the actual like meaning in it. So that's the interesting thing.
So just to go on this thread, how do we motivate companies, given the free market situation, to unblack box their black boxes, because they're hiding behind the black box? Like, how do we incentivize them to basically make AIs in order to discern all the different content that they're using automatically? There's no
this moratorium by Alec initiated. I don't recall exactly. Wasn't there a week ago this
The moratorium on
yeah,
AI
to have
development.
a 6 months moratorium on
But-
AI development in order to understand, try to understand within these 6 months what is in these black boxes. So that.
Childish, in my opinion, because you're
No, I think Jan Tallinn was the initiator, Estonian software.
so the problem there is
developer.
that you cannot forbid that. You cannot just rule it out. If you even do
No,
that
they
legally,
wanted a 6 month moratorium to try to get some kind of
the problem
basic.
is if you do that, it's a will underground. They
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
don't
okay.
talk about it. So it's
No, I'm not
counterproductive.
very well. I just heard something in the news or something
Yeah,
like
they
that. That's
tried.
my level of thinking forwards that.
Well, there's also the suspicion that Musk in particular is just wants more time. It's a ruse to essentially that he's falling behind in the race of AI, and it's just his ruse.
I think there are others that are farther ahead, but they're just not talking about it. The fact that the OpenAI is out and talking about it's great. There are systems that are more advanced. And the other point you made, I think, is hit the nail. It's not the electrified sand that's making the decision. It's the human that takes that input and then makes decisions based on that. So how do you protect the humans from making those mistakes and understanding that it's the sand, not the consciousness that's giving them the advice? I think that's good enough.
It will be like educational problem and ethics problem as well, because if you want to like regulate how not to do human errors or humanistical mistakes, then you have to educate humans, but same time humans tend to not follow the rules all the times, and if you are young people, then maybe you believe what media tells or like what you see on media site like TikTok or whatever from you listen or hear. But when teachers teach you something that you have to pay attention because you I don't know get robbed something like that, then who you believe much more. It becomes like eventually like a belief question from as I understand.
I would actually like to ask if there is online anybody ideas, opinions, just speak up or write to the chat, or what do you think about all this, and what do you think are the issues that we should address in this series?
I would be happy to direct the conversation a bit from the copyrights to something else. So also, I mean, similar stuff. It kind of was mentioned in the talk to some extent that well, with the ChatGPT, etc. But it's nothing so fast. And if we connect it to what was discussed in here about the moratorium, then it's actually it's like certain power relations. It's good for someone, bad for someone else. And the fact is that if you put moratorium for this, then someone else will still develop something similar, and it's hard to stop it. But there's with this fast development, there's also things like different versions of this GPT thing like coming out. Like for example, I think there's Auto GPT, like one of the million GPT things now, and as I've understood, it's something where it's kind of there is more of this more of iterative loops in there, and we're actually it doesn't just tell it to for example, you don't tell it to write the code, but to tell it to write me a web page, and then it writes the codes and it tests it himself. So it's gets into sort of like iteration. And I don't know how to, from a semiotics perspective and this sort of feedback loops, it's pretty interesting what's actually how the development goes, like from these different AIs actually, because there is like some change happening towards that brings certain biases and changes in the meaning that come out of it in the end, I guess. So like, what's the role of author also in that sense, of course? Yeah, but that's not a question about whether AI is, whether ChatGPT is a human-like character. No, like, but it is a question that how much of the sort of the relevance of the meaning behind it, how much of it comes from the status that it was trained on, how much comes from the actual this technology prompts, etc. itself, and how much it comes from from the human in the other hand who actually enters the prompt. And so because all of these parts are actually relevant to understand how the meaning is generated.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. The idea that where you started with if I understood correctly, that they're writing chat GPTs to come up with new chat GPTs, roughly speaking, that distances, this sort of remixing where the culture has been through certainly before, as we've talked about earlier with literature. But I'm also curious, one of the questions I have is, because what the algorithm is doing is going through huge data sets and coming up with kind of this really this average, and if we're adding layers upon layers of algorithms upon algorithms that are fundamentally automated, are they just cohering upon a mean, like an average, that then these technologies will run their course and they will mine what it is that they can mine, but they'll kind of plateau out and everything will start seeming vanilla, seeming the same that they'll produce, and that we're just in this sort of golden age of this initial age of what seems to be unending generativity, when in fact the systems will invariably, because of the nature of their algorithms, that they'll invariably cohere upon a common average, and that sort of mine will have been mined to completion, and then we'll move on to the next problem.
It sounds like that sounds like the idea that it will. So I've heard it before that it can sort of stabilize the culture in a sense. It's possible that sort of regeneration of certain ideas. But what you actually said in the beginning also, that it would function as sort of something that limits our exuberance of meaning, as sort of means of technology that provides this limitation or stabilization or something.
Yeah, I think that if either of what I speculated and what you just said are remotely true, then it speaks well to a Latmonian analysis where the center, so as he would say, is in tension with the prairie and the barbarians, if you will. Like, so the culture all these algorithms would be automating the maintenance of culture of the center, and that it would then generate more and more of a tension as the center coheres on itself, and diverges from other people not beholden to these algorithms and their output, and that there would be a divergence, and that this divergence would be, in Lotman's terms, an increasing amount of untranslatability, which would generate a certain amount of tension in society, which would have to reach a criticality, and then and then the spire of cohering upon this kind of one meaning that we've cohered upon would collapse and then have to flip. Well, Lotman, I think, would say that it would, the periphery, what's out in the periphery, would then flood in on what was being maintained as the center. So it's an interesting sort of cybernetic systems theoretic approach to like playing out how imagining how this might play out in term, over, well, more than just a year or even 10, but inevitably and eventually. Any thoughts on that?
Online people. I see Tyler smiling.
We can't.
Sorry, I'm gonna switch the mics in the local.
The idea of such a plateau, at least at this point, remains wishful thinking. Nevertheless, the suggestions provocative. This divergence towards those who don't rely on formalized technologies, I guess, are a new emphasis on organic creativity. Again, but still wishful thinking. Yes, we had no indication yet of a slow down. Plus, there's the added consideration that even if the technologies themselves slow down or even stop, their effect on society and the ecosystem is much slower. And so it will continue to exert its effect as ways of living continue to adapt to its ubiquity. So we're still looking at dramatic transformation of global civilization continuing into the future, or at least we have every reason to think so.
Yeah, so you were a little cut off at the beginning there, Tyler. Can you just reiterate? I think your initial claim was essentially saying that my little imaginative scenario is a nice thought experiment, but maybe a little oversimplistic.
Oh, yeah, it's provocative. I mean, it's compelling in the sense of if there were a vergence towards those who don't rely on these higher symbolic systems, computational and technological ones, a new emphasis on some kind of organic creativity. It's a nice vision, but nevertheless, we're presented with no indication of a slowdown of this technology or of a number of different convergent technologies, really. Plus, its impact, this technology, even if it were to stop developing at the rate that it's developing and were to plateau, its impact on society and the environment will continue to develop because it develops much more slowly than the tech itself. The way that it is altering the way we think and interact with each other will continue to exert its effect. So we're, of course, it seems to me at least, still looking at dramatic transformation of society as a result of this tech for the foreseeable future. Yes, that's why I called it maybe wishful thinking about this slowdown.
So even in the sense of organic creativity coming as a counter reaction to this new kind of creativity.
That's a very hopeful vision. I guess that's. I just wanted to say I like that, and I do hope.
But I see. Yeah, I wouldn't call it just hopeful because just the problem of lack of transparency of those systems. I think it may drive some people actually, away from technology to some extent, and just and together with the things like all of this fear of missing out, that sort of social acceleration, that sort of topics, and they're already connected to this sort of getting away from technology approaches. And with AI, it might take actually new dimensions. This sort of organic living, organic creation, if you will call it that way.
Tyler, really quickly, could you comment a little bit on how it is you imagine, so the exuberance will continue? Do you have any speculations, willing to put out any speculations on the kind of to characterize that continued generativity? Even putting in, normalizing it, saying whether it would be a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, in this connection, I liked a bit of what Alec was saying earlier, his interest in this. He mentioned job application processes, but also like criminal conviction processing and other ways in which the reliance upon AI could cause a hyper alienation, even as Josh called it, this accelerated alienation. And the way it decreases human interactivity as a result, I mean, it's motivated by, I mean, you save money, that cuts labor force, cuts labor demands by creating these formal systems to organize society. So it's like a self-incentivizing process of alienation. And this is only the most dystopic side of the thing. I would also point in connection with Alec's request to give some more examples of this techno effect. I would mention or emphasize newsfeed algorithms and information silos as a result of like newsfeed optimization. This is a very interesting topic of techno alienation. But anyway, that dystopic side is not the only side, of course. And maybe we're a bit too transfixed with the dystopic manifestations, but I wouldn't say anymore.
Any thoughts here? Thanks, Tyler.
Any thoughts online? Or here? Or...
As a random thought, I was thinking today, it's funny how when it comes to how we think about AI and humanity, we always model it as like, oh, AI is going to destroy mankind. But you don't really see the opposite side of like how AI will help mankind. How can we not make it seem that like, okay, once AI gets to a state of sentience or whatever you want to call, intelligence for that matter, why do we collectively, look at it as AI is going to destroy the creator? If they are reliant on us to live their life, why would they destroy that? So it's one of those things.
I have an hypothesis.
Okay.
Namely, it makes better literature. Makes better story. So it's kind of catastrophe makes better stories than kind of happy life. And I think that I suspect that may be the reason why we like to imagine AI destroying our life.
Yeah, that's probably, I think there's an element
Well,
there.
even then, it sounds like the Old Testament.
Yeah, it sounds the stories were told are very much like stories that have been told throughout many times throughout the history. So, but actually, one kind of random thought also I had during the first speeches was about this sensors, sentient beings, and Umwelt connection.
Sentient beings.
Because from this aspect, if we take these sensors or sentient beings, well, sensors and sentient beings are like a continuum rather than two different things. So when we get from sensors to sentient beings, but actually there are also AIs that doesn't have sensors. These are these linguistic-based models, for example. Can we analyze them all kind of models together, or we maybe should make a methodological distinction between AI or automata that use sensors and those that use linguistic models. So and if it uses linguistic models, language is actually an environment modeling tool. So in these aspects, actually we can say that the ChatGPT type of AI is Umwelt rather than a sentient being. It's like a descriptions of our collective human Umwelt. So then we can't ask whether the AI has an Umwelt, but AI itself is a description of an Umwelt.
If you make this if you use this terminology or so on, then there's still AI who are like constantly browsing the web, like constantly crawling. Like it's not this limited like big language model, but you could I don't know, would you call it a sensor in that sense, that it is constantly like aware and changing, well, aware, right? That it gets some new information and it kind of I don't know if you can say it develops, but the memory is changing, right?
So from this aspect, this sensor and sentient being is for me the crucial aspect. Whether we see whether the AI has a sensors, whether and it does, can we say due to that they are sentient beings? And so
yeah, so well, starting with the Umwelt, I would say no, that because the sensors as they're employed and associated with digital machines, that no matter, they have to be digitized, and that process of digitization essentially renders whatever semiosis is happening ostensibly like with animals in general and sensors, I would suggest are quite distinct from what is being rendered degenerate in the case of digitization. So in other words, if you have some waveform that's being sensed in any modality like sound, light, what have you, that the process of digitization is extricating the capacity. As it's being digitized, it's put into discrete states, and that those discrete states by definition don't relate anymore. They have to be related by an external programmer. So it gets to Auli's point about we've very much on purpose, for the sake of control and accuracy, we've created these machines that are designed very specifically to maximize control and stability. But stability is kind of almost the opposite of semiosis in a way, because it has no intrinsic affinities. This gets into Peirce's idea of semiosis. It has no intrinsic ability to relate to itself, because it's been extricated. It's very much on purpose through digitization, and the very nature of a bit, for example, a transistor slamming from cutoff to saturation in the operation of a transistor is these states, these ones and zeros, they have no capacity to relate to each other in the ways that either von Uxküll with his notion of protoplasm and conforming to plan, or certainly Peirce and with his positive sympathies and affinities we're thinking of when it comes to semiosis. So, and that's where I would say, if we start with that distinction between sentient beings and non-sentient beings, then we can find there are gradations, as you suggest, but I think that there is a major categorical break.
I would actually build upon this idea that ChatGPT is a description of our Umwelt, the digital part of it, and maybe really like a really very specific part of the digital Umwelt also, because when we come to like what kind of people populate the internet with texts, then it's a very specific and narrow demographic. It's not like in a social scientific sense, a representative part of our world, actually. So this is also like another huge topic. But yeah, in this sense, I mean, yes, and when it comes to sensors, then I would actually argue that sensors, so coming back to my previous idea about this technosocial assemblages, even the sensors that we put on stuff like AI, they mediate information between us, not between the machine, and like, because they are built in a way that they mediate information between us through space, through time, possibly. But, you know, like at one end you have like programmers and system designers and so on. So system architects and then people who somewhere there are some kind of readings, they come in, but there's always these human parts who interpret those readings, and it doesn't make sense to anybody but the human parts. Either it does or doesn't, but they are like the ones who are like the And so, and yeah, in this sense, the sensorial AI even is sort of like one part of the input is how programmers or system architects can build the things in a way that would output meaningful data to the end user.
The sentient end
Yeah,
users.
yeah.
Well, it's like even like using autonomous vehicles as an example. There's two main ways that they integrate data. So like the LiDAR, which is just reacting to stimuli, a plastic bag in the wind. This is something that you really can't predict that will happen like on this drive, right? So it's the LiDAR that reacts to that stimuli, but they also incorporate like a type of like spatial neural network, which tells you like where is drivable, what is not. The people, like the engineers, have to specify what speed is okay. And even then, you have to have different neural networks for different times of the day. Because traffic lights is one of the, especially traffic lights in bad weather conditions is one of the biggest issues. And that's one of those dangerous issues as well.
It's the same with human beings.
Yeah, but like we can build through experience that, but yet you have to, within, the AI system, you have to create these slices of like, okay, this is in the daytime in this parameter and so on. But even then, I can see what you mean about Umwelt, like, the text generators as the human Umwelt description. But even then, using autonomous vehicles as an example, and going off what you said about how it doesn't create new semiosis, it's just doing habit forming. This is what Kalevi was talking about last week about Umweb, because the Umweb, it doesn't actually create anything new per se. It just creates these relations. So this is where habits are formed, and that's where they're contained. So one day when we are all driving autonomous vehicles, what will happen to the city, like in the streets, for instance? Because right now, all of these streets, they're designed for human agency. But when autonomous vehicles are the predominant agent, how will the streets transform to mimic this sort of relation? So it's not so much about creating, I don't know, so in a way I see societal as like always a secondary aspect of these formed habits. I don't really see society taking the wheel with the technology, and that's, for me, that's the issue. Because culture is always, as we know, a secondary thing.
Yeah, it's also interesting too, just to dwell for a second on the Umwelt, like what is, like, how is the Umwelt constituted? And for von Uexküll, it necessarily involves this functional circle, and he was very concerned in theoretical biology about understanding animals, not just humans, as Kant was arguing, but animals as well, that have more than just reflexes or instincts, and that the functional cycle is the process that populates the Umwelt. And so we'd have to dig into what degree is our automated systems implementing a functional circle as one entry point among others, which would be interesting. Be up for that.
But will these black boxes allow us to investigate these kind of things?
I don't think so. I mean, I personally think the black boxes are very interesting tools that again automate essentially what it is that humans can already do. It's a subset of what it is humans can already do, and that we've just bolted algorithm upon algorithm, and they're fantastically well. For example, drag in a little bit of Peirce here, because I think Peirce actually was very prescient on this whole industry in describing his degenerate forms of evolution, where we have mechanism and chance. And that's essentially what what all of our machines are doing right now, or anything we consider AI, is essentially a stepwise oscillation between chance, randomizing all the different weights, and then algorithm, like doing back propagation and cause the algorithms to essentially update all the weights based on the training data. And then it's just this, every new the more complex these systems become are essentially just stacking on these ever more numerous, switching back and forth, iteratively switching back and forth between chance, between statistical processes and algorithmic processes. But what Peirce pointed out, and I think is in one of his more definitive moves, is that there's a different kind of evolution that's missing, and that's this positive sympathy. Now, to what degree does a computer or any machine that we build have a positive sympathy, have a that's distinct from either just chance or mechanism? And that's the piece that I think we just really don't even have a language for. We don't have technology for. We don't have metaphors for.
Well, just on the previous notion of the, to what extent is it just instincts and reflexes, and whether you cannot look into the black box. There's actually, I think there's already some studies with these generative and prompt-based models where it's actually like really tentative area for like several fields from psychology, etc. It just, you just kind of start asking the model questions, and then you try to understand it through that. So like, whether you kind of think of it as a discussion or something, but you can actually like externally somehow still access it. You don't know what it's done, but you can maybe try to, sort of backwards imagine like what its structure is. Or like that's a way at least you can find biases and so on, for example.
Yeah, I've been doing that with Dolly, just to look at a group of humans drinking beer. And you very much see this bias right away of 3 of the images are males, and then they're like real depictions of males, and one of the pictures is females of dark skin, and they're cartoon drawings. So it's like, okay, this isn't equal at all. So even then, when it comes to, sure, I can interpret, okay, why is why, but even then, when it comes to the black box, did they not have any non-cartoon pictures to generate from or anything? So even then, you don't know why the actual components of that artwork is generated. So that's something where, yeah, it's sure you can look at it from like the outsider's lens, but you still need to get the creator's interpretation as well, on why this is the way it is. Because then that brings in more of the ethical aspects of accountability and just transparency, for that matter. Because I do think that, like you brought up transparency earlier, I think that is one crucial aspect to keep in mind when it comes to how the core and the periphery affects the border, and just the actual qualia associated to this reality.
Any more ideas online? Or here?
I have one thing that I've heard about the sensors. It's also what's excurrent, what's going out. And I was Gecko around when he comes up and you look, it reminded me of this Siri Tarikas's search spiral. So instead of the functional cycle that closes, a search gets enacted. And I feel like when Gecko comes up, that's what goes on. We're sort of looking at each other and there's this mutual searching, and that's a big difference.
Andrew?
I don't have anything to say. One thing makes a big difference though.
I like a real like engagement. It's
But like characteristically,
I don't
like, is it like looking into the eyes and seeing like the soul of the animal?
I don't know about that, but just the searching, the act of that it's not shot. Like if an AI dog comes up, probably you're not gonna want to pet it or I didn't make that.
I think when Estonia was the chair of Estonia of European Union, and we had meetings in Estonia, and we had in one meeting there were some small robots serving drinks. And people starting to relate with them as they relate normally with pets, with dogs. Actually, people got this dog-like behavior towards these robots. Like they kind of interpreted them as sentient beings. Like saying, "Oh, you are so cute. Can I pet you?"
I think we're kind of like hardwired to do that with things that move and act as if they were alive. This has been pointed out in language models also, is that we have never before in culture had things that speak that are not human. And now we do, and we are just like not evolutionarily equipped to deal with that. So we start attributing qualities to those things as if they were equal to the normal speaking stuff in the universe. So
I have two things to like say. The first one is recently, like Stanford University did some experiments where they made autonomous trash cans, and they put a GoPro on it, and they were not looking at how the technology affects cleanliness. They're looking at the sociological impacts it had. What they found was like people would start humanizing the trash can, sure, but they like, oh, here you go, buddy, come closer, so they're trying to help this like non-living object. So even then, as a trash can that very much has this tone of like, you want to keep a proximity to it. You don't really want to interact with the trash can per se, but the fact that it has this like novel aspects to it, it makes it unique and memorable for them, because it probably is their first time interacting with that. But even when it comes to like in my research about like smart homes, one of the aspects they wrote about is when you are designing these technologies that have like personality to it, it's good to integrate dysfunctionality into it, because when you are trying to create like a family robot, in order for it to be accepted as a part of the family, you have to make it somewhat dysfunctional. And again, this is something that like, we're imprinting human faults onto like this technology that can be made, as it should. So even then, when this one article was talking about when technology starts doing something it shouldn't be doing, we start personifying it. We start saying it's your fault, but yet it's actually the end user that doesn't know what the issue is. So in a way, this does lead back to literacy, in my opinion, and competence. So these are like the semiotic components that my research looks at on like, okay, how do you troubleshoot this specific problem? But yet, if we are integrating dysfunctionality to begin with, that's not going beyond like human, reality. It's feeding into this absoluteness of consumerism. But even the dysfunctionality thing, it is pretty interesting though. So that's why when these little robots, they're made to have twitches or made to kind of not maybe pronounce things precisely correct, but when there's like these little quirks to them, this is why they're quirky at times.
When you mentioned semiosphere, sorry, like in your opinion, let's say on which part, like, you know, of semiosphere would you now currently put artificial intelligence?
I don't see it being as that in a way. I see it as something that like
has like both three components.
Yeah,
or?
because it's becoming meshed in culture.
Yeah.
You know, you can be the teacher and you can write an email to your students using AI. You can be the student, you can do the homework in AI and so on. So I don't, again, it varies.
So it has, let's say, its own semiosphere then. Should have.
Yeah, that's why I'm kind of curious as well, understanding like, you know, if we remove human culture, what is the AI's culture looking like? So that's
interesting. I remember when I think it was Nelly's class, Uxco's readings actually, and one of our colleagues actually, since she's into semiotics, so semiotics of theology, she actually made a very interesting and very like for me still a very good comment about robots and artificial intelligence, how they should have like those human characteristics, how they should have like that fear of God as well. Since God created us in let's say in his face, so those robots and that artificial intelligence stuff should also be like in the face, like let's say have human characteristics and depictions and even emotions, I guess, in some extent.
That's one of the underlying myths in the AI development, actually, also for several.
We are the God too, so.
Yeah, we are their creator, of course. So we give them like basic commands and everything. They can't function without humans still. But I was also curious on how AI is presented in cartoons, let's say. I mean, the Jetsons, when you mentioned the family robot, they had a family robot. And there was this cartoon back in the day, like Robot Boy, actually. I don't know if any of you saw it or it was on Cartoon Network. So basically, that was also this robot which wanted actually to be a real boy. So they sent him with a real boy so he could study to become a real boy, to have like real boy interactions, real boy emotions, real boy everything. And that robot actually cried in one episode and like the oil came out of it. It was funny.
That's great.
We have a comment on the chat.
Yeah.
Veronica, would you like to speak up?
Do you want to, or we can read it, Veronica, your choice.
we can read it for her.
Yeah, well, I'll start reading, Veronica. Feel free to chime in. Yeah, so Veronica had a nice comment on the chat. She said, "Hi, maybe it has already been mentioned, but ChatGPT, the GPT model in general, does not actually quote understand, but more generally binds together words and tenses based on the request. This implies that quote truth is actually an option." Saying that, I guess that one of the main problems related to this kind of technology may be the consequent spread of disinformation and the need to improve current language models to further improve natural language understanding. Sorry, I got lost here. I scrolled.
Especially in education related scenarios.
Especially in educated related scenarios. Yeah, thank you. Our perception of reality has been changing at a really fast pace during the last decades, and newer generations may fall in a very poor and inaccurate understanding of the world if we don't improve both on the educational and engineering side. And in parentheses, especially referring to semantics and pragmatics in human machine interface.
This is a really good point. Yeah, I'm following Emily Bender's theory a lot in that, and how she argues, that we shouldn't use the word understand for language models because it basically gives the wrong impression. Some semioticians have argued that it depends how you define understanding. But yeah, like there is always, I mean, yeah, we can always define words so that they fit humans and machines alike. That's what has been happening with cybernetics theory a lot. But yeah, like if this has real consequences, so yeah, this comes back to this metalinguistic critique, is like if this has the real consequences to societies and people and how we I don't know, like our attitudes or exactly this perception of reality and inaccurate understanding, if we expect the machines to do something that they do not do because we use the word understanding to describe what they do, then maybe that's a problem. Yeah.
I'm also curious about this. What kind of memory actually do robots have, let's say? So how did you define?
I was gonna
Random.
I was gonna ask something similar actually, yeah, because this question, like, yeah, the focus is on this human machine interface, like Auli mentioned also, but yeah, there's the memory thing. I think is something else in there, right? So something is that is, you know, innate in the AI model, and other thing is what is how human looks at it and how the human interprets it in the end, like something in between, right?
Yeah, memory, like the memory in this thing. I mean, it definitely is not like our memory, is what I can say. The technical details, probably.
Kind of like you're browsing history or something like that.
Yeah.
If it does,
But would you?
no at all. If it's only ephemeral for the process or the duration of the prompt, it's just ephemeral memory.
Yeah, it's basically, yeah, because it searches through some kind of past interaction to make better predictions, as ChatGPT and other language models do, for example. But yeah, then the limit of the amount of past that it can search through, it has been also pointed out that sort of like if it seems to lose track of the conversation, so to speak, quite quickly and more quickly than people would expect. So again, like these expectations versus like the reality gap. Yeah, because it actually is very energy intensive to search, right?
Well, that's one point, but then if you deliver it, otherwise it starts to become quite weird. So if you put limit on how many interactions you could have, it starts to get quite weird.
Yeah, I think from a semiotics actually can help us a bit here with different kinds of memory. So for example, there's Simondon and semiotics talk a bit about different kinds of time, and that animal time, sentient time, if you will, is more of a, I think it was Bergson's notion of a duration, is not an instant, and that I think maybe what you were saying is that for a digital machine by design, its moments, if you will, are instant. And Simondon argues that the past for a machine is radically past. Whereas for an animal, we have a specious present or a duration, if you will, such that we're superposing at any given time instantaneously a sense of the here and now with what it is that's not present. And this is the fundamental premise of semiotics, is that a sign necessarily is about both itself in the here and now and what's not present, something that's not present. And that sentient beings necessarily for memory, for some actually veritable notion of memory, semiosis more generally must entail this capacity, this sort of spread out, and that for different animals, for example, like a bird's duration would be much quicker, such that it can, fly as fast as it does and navigate in ways that we never could. Nevertheless, it's non-zero. That there's a series of moments, and that these moments have a dimensionality to them that's fantastically complex, and again necessarily entails the past, present, and future at the same time, even if we're not consciously aware of it. Otherwise, there's no way to connect. There's no way to do what it is we would call semiosis. And arguably machines fundamentally don't do that even remotely, not even kind of.
Maybe for me, the final thought regarding students, we should encourage them if they are writing some essay or doing homework to use whatever tools they have, including GPT, but then explain how they use it. Because if we deprive them from that possibility, we will be limiting their success in the future once these things are fielded and whenever they use. So we need to teach them how to use it for the best.
What age would you say?
Whatever, as soon as possible.
Like, because like,
They will grow up in this jungle.
yeah, because I mean, I'm very much agree how like, within grade school, you should definitely have digital competency, especially for Estonia being this digital nation. Who teaches competence? So this is something where this is what like I want to research more about and make an actual impact in this. But even then, it relies on like the national level and then very much the county level as well. So it takes a lot of stakeholders at hand, because like it's not just the teachers or the admin, it's the parents as well, and it's the peers as well too. Like I did a presentation at like a elementary school, and 8-year-olds are asking me about like if I've ever met a YouTuber with over 1 million likes in real life, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't think about like
Careless.
yeah. So all of their questions to me as like a foreigner living in Tartu, it was about YouTube. So it showed how like they go off school, they go straight to the TV, and this is their God. And this was one of the concerning things, like, because sure, finding content to watch online, you can teach them the competency early on. But when it comes to co-evolving with, a text generator, when you don't even know what, I don't know, a theory is, and yet you rely on technology to teach you that theory, it's one-sided, so that's something where I do see it very much essential to teach right away, but how, that's the real question.
I think there's an interesting use case, which is the calculator. So there's back before computers were actually humans. They were humans who did calculations, and then we invented automation.
They were mostly women.
Yes, and they were mostly women. But and the first programmers were mostly women. But back when I was a little before, when I was young, the question was similarly like, at what point do you stop teaching multiplication tables and start just handing them a calculator? The question was never like there were people that said, we'll never hand them a calculator. They should always do it in their head. But the vast majority, obviously we know what happened, is that we all got handed calculators, and I don't know how much for kids these days they're being taught their multiplication tables. But it's an interesting case that's similar, not exactly what you said, in the sense of, I think there is a place for having kids write like a basic paragraph or something, but then have that as like an exemplar of that exercise, to be able then to go to the tool and say, we'll compare your effort to what it is you can or can't do, and then go to the next level. Like, well, what can this tool help you do, like a calculator can?
Because I think I can see this sort of engagement being useful to help teach how to like do research with AI, like, the just typical grammatical writing and such. But it could also be useful to like world making and storytelling. So, to look at it as a resource. So sure, as a kid, maybe you understand that these imaginative figures are in your head, but you don't know how they kind of fit together. This is where you can let the AI help you build the story, and then you can come to the teacher and then talk about, these are the epistemic truths I had in mind, but yet this is how the syntax that was created. And then from there, you can kind of understand, or you can help educate them on how to make it more of their own story. Identify what things do you not like and have them look over it and to make adjustments to it, because it is one of those things. I do find AI to be great for like self-editing. You know, I think we should all be doing this. You know, so not a lot of energy needed to do this at all. But again, it's just the stigma of like, if you're doing something wrong or like immoral or unethical, you know, so that's currently where we're at, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's the question of will, and of course, not all the teachers will pick it up. I know that in some, let's say, higher education places, it is already in place, and they encourage students to do that. It's just the question when is it going to be picked up, and when is it becoming a norm? Because we have created this not concrete jungle, but electronic jungle for them, where they are growing up and they have no clue what they're going to be in plus 5 years. We just have to make it as successful possible, as successful as possible.
Just for on the lighter side, Mark, I don't think it came through the chat. It was a link, so I thought I'd share it just for yeah, just so that you guys can see what Mark's saying. I shut off my camera if you want to. Yeah,
Veronica left a comment also about Uncanny Valley.
Oh, did she?
Yeah, like so I was wondering if anybody wants to comment on Uncanny Valley. This is again like another.
I'm going to stop sharing. We got the gist. Yeah, I'd love to comment on the Uncanny Valley. Oh yeah, thank you very much. God creator, super interesting. It made me think of, okay, let me read her comment because it actually is a nice segue. Let's see, Veronica said, I also found the insight of the God creator super interesting. It made me think about the Uncanny Valley concept on the human side. Maybe humans as a community are not ready to face technologies that are too humanoid. I think I do want to comment on that. That's a great point, Veronica. Thanks, because I think in some ways we really aren't that far from making sentient machines, but we aren't on that path right this moment. There's no, I would argue, and it's a longer argument, but I would argue that our current technologies are very much about controlling those technologies and for them to do very specific things repeatedly and accurately and with more or less either entertaining or useful results. And that maybe there is a case to be made for this Uncanny Valley that if we started at, like on some level, maybe we collectively don't want to go to actual sentient machines just yet, because we're not, it's just too creepy.
So I, for one, would welcome our robot.
Okay. Yeah, that's good.
Does anybody have any last comments, or because then we should probably wrap it up for today, but a last round of or online.
Yeah, I like Veronica's comment. I don't want to get into it though after Uncanny Valley and all that, because I'm sure we'll definitely talk more about it.
About Uncanny Valley.
Yeah, because that is, you know, there's different ways that we can get into it. Yeah, because even then you see it a lot happening in video games recently. Is the aesthetic aspect of, you know, what they look like, these, you know, non-playable characters is one thing, but now incorporating AI into these non-playable characters it generates another form of like uncanniness because you don't know. Sometimes, I don't know, talking to AI, it seems more human-like than talking to actual humans within these digital spaces. So, you know, it's the roles have reversed sometimes within these virtual environments. So yeah, I'm sure somewhere in the future I'll talk more about Uncanny Valley.
It's a good one. Yeah.
Yes, the people online. It was great seeing y'all, or seeing the names and pictures and everything. I hope the audio was good and clear. Yeah.
Yeah, feel free to, if anyone has comments about, the audio, and because we passed to the, I'm not sure about this technique going forward in the future, but feel free to let us know it worked or it didn't work this time around. It was great. Okay.
Thank you. And yeah, so the next edition, May 8th, and we will discuss a paper by Victoria Alexander and Josh and Oscar Castro that is comparing. Can you say it in one sentence?
Oh God, I don't even know. I remember my own paper name. Comparing,
comparing the semiosis of a slime mold to the generative AI, and
yeah,
teaser slime mold wins.
Yeah. Yeah. Well
But
said.
how and why, then we'll find out in 2 weeks' time this time. Yeah. Around the same time. The event in Eventbrite is already up, so, and I will be uploading this. Veronica, it's in the Eventbrite. Oh, or can we share it? Like,
Oh yeah, I believe. Geez, that's a good question.
There's so many laptops here that and things
see the
that
state. It has a strange state on research date. I don't know. Tori
I
got into trouble because she was sharing it too much.
I can drop the event link also.
Well, yeah, can we put the link on the Eventbrite?
Yeah, or the Technosemiotics website.
I should just make sure I find the right version that's not going to freak out the publisher.
Oh no, I have it. Okay. Ugh. Everyone in meeting. So this is the next event link on the Technosemiotics website. Yeah, so many. Anyway, yeah, so I'll be uploading this video to YouTube and hopefully transcribing it also for like a text review, so you can follow that.
Yeah. And so, yeah, again, so for the paper, what's our plan for because I have to find the right version so we can load it on.
It's on the page that I shared.
Okay. All right.
Anyway, but yeah, so thank you everyone, and see you hopefully in 2 weeks.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you all.